We often think of near-death experiences, these strange, vivid accounts, as a modern thing. But what if they're not new at all? Today, we're asking a pretty wild question. Could these profound encounters be hidden in plain sight right inside the pages of the Bible? Let's find out. So that's really the big question driving our explainer today. Are these incredible, life-altering events just a product of our modern medical age? Or could people have been having very similar experiences for thousands of years, just describing them with the words and ideas of their own time? Okay, first things first, let's be super clear about our goal here. We are not trying to prove these were NDEs. Instead, think of this as an experiment. For centuries, these stories have been seen as divine miracles or symbolic visions, and that's a totally valid and powerful way to read them. We're just adding another layer, kind of putting on a new pair of glasses to see what fresh details might suddenly pop into focus. To guide our little experiment, we need a framework. What are we actually looking for? Well, based on countless modern accounts, we're going to be on the lookout for stories that have at least one of these key features: a sense of the spirit separating from the body, powerful visions of another realm, a description of consciousness fading right at the brink of death, or a dramatic return from a state that looks, for all intents and purposes, like death itself. So let's start with maybe the most famous hallmark of an NDE, the vision. We're going to look at two well-known figures who, at a critical moment, reported seeing something far beyond the veil of normal, everyday experience. Our first two examples are Stephen and Paul, and their experiences were actually quite different. For Stephen, the vision came at the very moment of his death. But for Paul, it was something more like a journey, an out-of-body trip to another realm, a place he actually came back from. Now, the context for Stephen's vision is absolutely crucial. He's being martyred. The book of Acts tells us that in his final, painful moments, his focus completely shifts from his earthly suffering to a clear, heavenly vision. And this is why some interpretations see it as a classic NDE-like event, a transcendent glimpse into the afterlife, right on the threshold of death. Paul's account is even more mysterious. He talks about an experience where he didn't know if he was in the body or out of the body. I mean, that specific description of being caught up to another realm, where he perceived things beyond human language, aligns incredibly closely with the NDE hallmarks of bodily separation and visiting a transcendent, otherworldly dimension. So, we've seen visions of the afterlife, but what about stories of returning from it? Our next section looks at two incredible accounts of revival and survival that closely mirror modern stories of people coming back from the absolute brink. Now, a key piece of context for our next story is the word Sheol. In the ancient Hebrew mindset, this wasn't necessarily a place of punishment like hell. It was understood more neutrally as the destination of the dead, the grave, a place of darkness and silence. And that brings us to Jonah's terrifying experience. He's not just trapped in a fish. He describes his consciousness fading and cries out from the depths of Sheol. So, through an NDE lens, this isn't just a physical ordeal. It's interpreted as a near-death state, where Jonah believed he was in the land of the dead, yet his spiritual awareness remained right before he ultimately returned to life. A more direct parallel can be found in the book of 1 Kings. Here, a widow's son stops breathing and is considered dead. The prophet Elijah intervenes, and miraculously the boy is revived. This narrative, a dramatic return from a death-like state, is often compared to modern resuscitation cases that sometimes lead to people reporting NDEs. Okay, so these four accounts from completely different parts of the Bible all share these intriguing parallels. But what does it really mean to see them through the lens of a near-death experience? Let's zoom out and consider the bigger picture. So let's just quickly recap what we found. We have Stephen's vision at death's door, Paul's out-of-body journey, Jonah's experience of near-death consciousness in Sheol, and the widow's son returning from a death-like state. Each one aligns remarkably well with those NDE hallmarks we established right at the beginning. It is so important to stress this again. We're not claiming these were scientifically verifiable NDEs. The real insight here is how a modern concept can act like a key, unlocking new layers of meaning in these ancient stories. Whether you see them as miracles, metaphors, or something else entirely, this lens gives us a fresh perspective and a powerful new way to connect with the human experience inside these narratives. This leaves us with a final, provocative question. If the concept of the NDE can offer such a fascinating new lens on the Bible, what other modern ideas, from psychology, sociology, or science, could we use to unlock even deeper meanings in the stories that shaped our world? It's a powerful reminder that these ancient texts are not static. They can continue to speak to us in new and surprising ways if we're only willing to listen.
Today, we're doing something pretty ambitious. We're taking a modern psychological concept, near-death experiences, or NDEs, and applying that lens to some of the most ancient foundational stories in the Bible.
It's a fascinating approach, really. We're going beyond just saying, oh, this story involves death.
Yeah.
We're asking if the actual structure of the experience, the internal journey, matches up with what thousands of people report in modern NDEs.
Exactly. So our mission for you, the listener, is to unpack how this interpretation even works. You've given us sources that analyze specific biblical accounts as if they were NDEs, so we're going to break down 4 key examples to see how they build that case.
And the core question really is this. How do these ancient descriptions of, extreme physical distress, these visions, these returns from the brink of death, how do they align with what we now call NDEs? The shared elements are what's so interesting: separation from the body, a heightened spiritual awareness, and then revival.
Absolutely. And to do that, we're going to follow the arc of the experience itself. We'll start with separation and vision, looking at Paul and then Stephen. Then we'll go into the deep crisis part with Jonah. And finally, the return, the physical revival with the widow's son.
A great roadmap.
Okay, let's jump in. Let's start with Paul and his pretty remarkable journey to the third heaven.
Okay.
So we're in 2 Corinthians 12. Paul is describing this experience. He says it's someone he knows, but it's generally accepted he's talking about himself, who was caught up to the third heaven. What immediately stands out, though, is his confusion about his own body.
That confusion is everything. It's the core link. He says, very explicitly, that he didn't know if he was in the body or out of the body.
Right.
In modern NDE research, that has a name. It's called autoscopy. It's that experience of seeing yourself from the outside, of separating from your physical form. The sources we're looking at see Paul's account as basically a classic report of that.
Okay, but hang on. Paul was a mystic. He had visions all the time. How do the sources justify taking this one event and labeling it with a modern clinical term like autoscopy? Isn't that just forcing a modern idea onto an ancient spiritual event?
That's a really fair question. And the sources defend it by pointing to the context. This wasn't just a dream or another prophecy. Paul describes it as this completely unique, overwhelming event where he couldn't even tell what was physically happening to him. And then there's the other part.
The indescribable things.
The indescribable things, exactly. He says he heard things that no one is permitted to tell. And that connects directly to another core NDE concept, ineffability.
Right.
So many people who have NDEs come back and say the experience, the knowledge they gained, it just can't be put into human words. It's too profound.
So Paul saying he heard indescribable things is seen as a perfect match for that.
It's a perfect match. The argument is that Paul isn't just describing a vision. He's describing a structured event, separation from the body, and then gaining this profound, ineffable knowledge.
I see. So if Paul's story is about this journey away from the body, let's shift to Stephen. His vision happens not in some peaceful, transcendent state, but at the absolute moment of death.
That's a great transition. We're moving to Acts 7, and the scene is, well, it's brutal. Stephen is being stoned. It's an active, ongoing execution.
And right in the middle of that chaos, as he's dying, the text says he looks up and sees this vision of Jesus standing at the right hand of God. It's this moment of total spiritual clarity in the middle of complete physical destruction.
And that timing is why analysts see it as an NDE-like moment. It's happening precisely on the threshold of death. But the sources here often bring up a different concept, something called veridical perception.
Veridical perception. Can you break that down for us?
Sure. In NDE studies, it refers to when someone who is unconscious or even clinically dead reports seeing or hearing things in the physical world that turn out to be true.
Things they shouldn't have been able to know.
Exactly. Now with Stephen, it's a spiritual vision, not a physical one, but the principle is similar. While his body is failing, he has this incredibly specific vision. Jesus is standing, not sitting. For some theologians, that detail is significant.
So the interpretation isn't just that he saw a vision, but that his consciousness, his soul, maybe gained this heightened, incredibly clear spiritual insight right at the moment his physical body was shutting down.
Precisely. For Paul, it's about separation and knowledge that can't be spoken. For Stephen, it's about this crystal clear vision at the exact point of departure. Both suggest an experience of consciousness that's actually heightened by the failure of the body.
That's a crucial distinction. Okay, so we've looked at ascent and heavenly visions. Now let's go in the complete opposite direction, from transcendence to descent, to Jonah.
Right. We're shifting from the light and expansion of heaven to the dark, confined abyss of the great fish. This is where the NDE analogy really focuses on the existential crisis stage.
The sources talk a lot about his condition over those 3 days. He describes his consciousness fading, being trapped, submerged. It's a total crisis. And he says, this quote is so powerful, he was crying out from the depths of Sheol. And for anyone listening, Sheol is the biblical term for the grave, the realm of the dead. He's not just scared, he believes he's in the place of death itself.
And that specific language it's incredibly potent when you look at it through the NDE lens. Yeah. The argument in these sources is that this isn't just a metaphor for fear, it's describing an experience very similar to what NDE researchers call the void.
The void.
Yes. In many modern NDE reports, people describe entering this infinite, dark, silent space. For some, it's terrifying. For others, it's peaceful. But it's often where this profound self-reckoning, almost a life review, happens.
I see. So Jonah's cry from the depths of Sheol, while he's literally submerged in darkness, is seen as a parallel to that existential crisis in the void.
Absolutely. The interpretation connects his physical state being swallowed near death with his internal spiritual state. His prayer from inside the fish is, in a way, his life review. He's confronting his failures, his relationship with God, his own mortality. It's a perfect ancient echo of that deep self-reflection that happens at the brink of death.
That really reframes the story. The sheer terror of being trapped, submerged.
Yeah.
It makes that Sheol line feel less like poetry and more like a description of a conscious spiritual crisis.
It does.
Which brings us to our last example, and it's the piece that really closes the loop for any NDE comparison. The return, the revival. We're talking about the widow's son.
Yes. This story in 1 Kings 17 is probably the most direct parallel to modern clinical cases because it's a clear-cut story of someone moving from an apparent state of death back to life.
So, just to set the scene, the son of a widow gets sick and dies. The prophet Elijah takes the boy's body, goes upstairs, and does something very specific. He stretches himself out on the child 3 times and prays.
And then the text says the boy's soul returned and he revived. That narrative structure is just gold for this kind of analysis. Modern NDEs are almost always linked to a clinical revival, CPR, defibrillation. The sources we looked at see Elijah's action, the physical body-to-body contact, as a kind of ancient ritualized form of that intervention. It's the act that brings the soul back.
So it's not just that he came back to life, it's that the process of bringing him back is documented, and that process is being compared to the often very physical efforts to revive someone today.
Exactly. The core similarity is that unmistakable transition from lifelessness back to life. But the really big question it raises, the NDE question, is what happened in between?
What did the boy experience?
Right. The text doesn't say. But the sources use this example to highlight that for an NDE story to even exist, you need the survival. You need the return. And often, people who return are profoundly changed. Their values shift. Their fear of death is gone.
So while the Bible doesn't say if the boy's personality changed, the event itself confirms that idea of a soul, a conscious self, that can leave and then return to the body.
And it transforms the community that witnesses it. That's the key takeaway.
This has been a really fascinating deep dive. So to sort of boil it all down for you, the listener, we've gone from Paul's out-of-body journey and his ineffable vision, what the sources call autoscopy, to Stephen's final, clear spiritual sight during his execution veridical perception.
Then we went down into Jonah's crisis in the depths of Sheol, which parallels the NDE void and life review phase.
And we ended with the widow's son, whose story gives us that critical element of physical revival, the return to life that makes the entire NDE narrative possible.
Yeah, we've basically drawn a line connecting these ancient accounts of, trauma and vision to the patterns we see in modern NDE reports. The sources aren't necessarily focused on whether they were miracles, but on whether the internal human experience of it all follows a consistent pattern across thousands of years.
It just shows how powerful these ancient stories are and how they keep inviting new interpretations, new comparisons with what we're learning about consciousness today. It's a real dialogue between faith and psychology.
It really is. I think what these interpretations suggest is that the core human experience of facing the edge of life, and maybe even getting a glimpse of what's beyond it, might just be a universal thing that transcends culture and time. Which leaves a provocative question for you to think about. If this lens could be applied to these 4 stories, what other ancient texts from any tradition might be hiding